Hi, my name is Jake Morrill. I'm a minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and I'm also the executive director of the UU Christian Fellowship. When I was asked to share a homily on white supremacy, the story that came to mind was one from my own family. My grandmother's first memory was when she was 4 or 5 years old, and she saw her father coming in through the door one night, and he was beaten and bloody. This was in Gladbrook, Iowa, a little town in north central Iowa, formed and founded by German immigrants. But by the time of World War I, which is when this story takes place, there was fear in the community that Germans and German immigrants were not being sufficiently pro-American, that their identity was in question. And so my grandfather was seen by his neighbors to be somebody who hadn't gotten on board. And sure enough, he and my grandmother's family attended a German Methodist church where they sang their hymns in German. They celebrated German folk holidays. They participated in German cultures as a way of sustaining their identity and their culture and their roots. But his neighbors who beat him up during World War I were letting him know that if you want to be American, if you want to be white, you need to cut off your culture, your roots, your common identity, your cultural identity, and you will have the safety and security and access to power. I remember this story because for me, it boils down and captures what it means to be white. What it means to be white is to be lost adrift, a fictional culture which is based in domination and power, but not in roots, not in songs, not in memories or stories that go back generations. Now, we have a spiritual challenge, white people do, and I want to tell you by sharing two stories. The early Christians in the book of Acts are seen as this radically loving, radically inclusive community. The first person baptized is by St. Philip in the book of Acts is a eunuch, a gender non-conforming person, and so and there's women who are speakers and leaders. So there's this sense of reaching out to the margins and drawing in. But too often, that can leave some assumptions unquestioned, for namely that those in the community already are at the center, reaching out to draw in. Now, I want to tell you the story of the Good Samaritan just to turn that on its head. A lawyer in the Gospel of Luke asks Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus has been trying to answer, and the lawyer's just not getting it. So finally, Jesus tells this story of the Good Samaritan. Man on the road to Jericho is beaten up, knocked, and down into a ditch. He's wounded there, and a priest walks by, a Levite walks by. These are people of his own religious community who he would expect to help, but they don't help. They keep on walking by. Finally, a Samaritan comes by. A Samaritan is, the other, somebody from who is despised. It's like if somebody from a different political party walked by, but it's this person, the Samaritan, who reaches down in the ditch, who pulls up the person, cares for him, tends to his wounds, and puts him up at an inn for 3 days so that he can heal. Now, when we use the phrase Good Samaritan in religious community, especially in white-dominated religious communities, there's the sense that we identify with the Good Samaritan, the helper, the one who has the resources, the capacity, and the well-being to reach down into the ditch. But that's not what Jesus meant. Jesus was telling the story from the perspective of the person down in the ditch. He was answering the lawyer, this person of status, of knowledge and learning, by positing that the lawyer was down in the ditch. This is what it means to have unchecked privilege, is that we hear a story about how we're down in the ditch, but for generations we tell the story as if we're the Good Samaritan up on the road, as if we're the ones who are helping. It's as if we are still in need, we white people, of the Copernican revolution, that astronomical shift by which Nicholas Copernicus said, the Earth is not at the center. The sun is at the center of the universe, with the Earth circling around it. And it was decades later that Giordano Bruno came up with something even wilder out there. He was saying the sun is not at the center of the universe, but there are infinite suns. And so we need to understand ourselves within this great interdependence in which there is no center. This is the spiritual challenge that white people have today, is to understand that we are adrift and soul-sick for having paid the price of losing our culture and community, our songs and our stories, in exchange for access to power and privilege, which leaves us starved and thirsting for meaning, alienated, isolated, and lonely. And that as long as we hold on to our fiction, that we're at the center, that we are reaching out to others, that we are the Good Samaritan walking along the road, and that others are suffering, as long as we don't admit that we too are suffering and confess our great need for help and aid, our great need to listen and to learn, then we will forever be adrift. So I'm asking white people, my white brothers, sisters, and siblings, in this time where Unitarian Universalism is reflecting on how it has unthinkingly centered white culture, white norms, white people, white leaders, white voices, that we would take a seat for a second, step back, take a deep breath and listen, and consider how it is in our families, in our lives, in our habits, in our assumptions, that we have put ourselves at the center of things and missed up the opportunity for the Copernican revolution and the Bruno revolution, in which we find ourselves held up and beheld by the beauty that is the great interdependence of many voices, many cultures, many stories, many songs, all of which may nourish us, all of which will help us find our way back home. So may it be.